She was 5 months pregnant, standing in a room that cost more than her entire life. They were laughing. Not just a few people, but everyone. Her new husband, the man who swore to protect her, just stood there and watched. They called her trash. They called her a gold digger. They laughed at her simple dress and the baby in her belly. But in 5 minutes, every single laugh would die. The doors were about to open, and the silence that fell would be the sound of their entire world ending, because her crown had just arrived. This is the story of how a single night changed everything. The invitation was not an invitation. It was a summons, delivered on cardstock so thick and creamy it seemed to weigh a pound. It arrived not by mail, but by a silent, uniformed courier who handed the obsidian black envelope to Emmie Vance. Now, technically, Emmie Blackwood, as if she were handling a live grenade. It read, "Mr. and Mrs. Leon Blackwood are requested at the annual Blackwood Founders Ball." Emmie's hand trembled as she traced the embossed gold crest. She was 5 months pregnant, and she had been married to Leon Blackwood for 6. Theirs had been a whirlwind, a collision of two worlds that had no business touching. He was the heir to the Blackwood Industries fortune, a name synonymous with New York's oldest and most ruthless money. She was not. She was Emmie Vance, a former art history student and librarian who met Leon when he ducked into the New York Public Library during a sudden downpour, looking less like a billionaire and more like a lost puppy. They fell in love with a ferocity that felt real, vital, and intoxicating. He loved her quiet strength, her encyclopedic knowledge of Renaissance art, and the fact that she didn't know, or care, what his last name meant. She loved him for his kindness, his easy laugh, and the way he seemed desperate to escape the very world he inhabited. He proposed in a tiny, nondescript Italian restaurant. They eloped at City Hall 3 weeks later, when the first faint swell of their child was beginning to show. And for 6 months, they had lived in a secret bubble. Leon kept his own penthouse apartment in Tribeca, separate from his family's imposing Fifth Avenue stronghold. He had told his parents, of course. The phone call Emmie overheard had been less of a conversation and more of a declaration of war. His mother, Stella Blackwood, had apparently hung up. His father, Arthur, had mumbled something about responsibility and complications. His sister, Beatrice, had sent a single text. "You've just signed your own death warrant, you idiot." Now the bubble was about to burst. The Founders' Ball was the Blackwoods' ultimate display of power. It was where they cemented alliances, crushed rivals, and, as Leon joked grimly, sacrificed a goat to the gods of finance. "We don't have to go," Leon said, his voice tight. He was standing by the window of their sunlit apartment, but he wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at his reflection. "Leon, it's the first time we've been invited as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," Emmie said, trying to keep her voice light. She laid a hand over her bump. "It's time. They have to meet me. They have to meet us." "You don't know my mother," he muttered. "She's not a person, Emmie. She's an institution, and she doesn't like surprises. I'm not a surprise. I'm your wife. And this," she patted her belly, "is her grandchild." Leon's smile was weak, haunted. "Just stay close to me. No matter what, just stay by my side." The anxiety set in almost immediately. The dress code was winter gala. Emmie looked in her closet. Her clothes were simple, elegant, and modest. Thin silks, soft cashmeres, and librarian chic wool skirts. Nothing that could stand up to a room full of couture. "I'll take you shopping," Leon offered, pulling out his phone. "We'll call the stylists at Bergdorf's. We'll get you something." "No," Emmie said firmly. She had her own savings from her old job, and a small inheritance from the aunt who had raised her. She would not walk into that lion's den draped in Blackwood money. It felt like a surrender. I can find my own dress. I want to. Leon, to his credit, understood. Okay. Okay, Emmie. But are you sure? She was sure. She was also, it turned out, naive. She spent a day walking through boutiques in Soho, feeling more and more like an alien. Everything was too sharp, too modern, too expensive. The sales assistants looked through her, their eyes flicking to her simple coat and her growing belly with polite disinterest. Finally, in a small, dusty consignment shop in the West Village, she found it. It was a deep, sapphire blue velvet gown. It was simple, long-sleeved, with a graceful neckline. It wasn't a designer label, but the fabric was heavy and pure. When she put it on, it draped over her pregnancy, with an elegance that made her feel like a painting by Titian. Maternal, strong, and real. It cost almost her entire savings, but she didn't care. When she showed Leon, he looked relieved. "It's beautiful, Emmie. You look regal." She held on to that word. Regal. It was a piece of armor. The night of the ball, the air in the city was bitingly cold. A private car, a gleaming black Bentley that was a separate class of vehicle from any Uber she'd ever seen, arrived to pick them up. Leon was silent and pale in his perfect tuxedo. "You look," Emmie started, reaching for his hand. "Like I'm going to my own execution," he finished, attempting a laugh that sounded more like a choke. "You look handsome, and you're squeezing my hand too hard." "Sorry." He loosened his grip, but didn't let go. "Emmie, my mother, she plays games. She'll try to get under your skin. Don't let her. Just remember, I love you. I love you too." The car turned off the main road and onto a private, winding drive. They left the city lights behind, entering a world of ancient trees and deep shadows. And then Hawthorne, the Blackwood ancestral estate, rose up from the darkness. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress, stone and glass and cold, symmetrical spite. Lights blazed from every window, but it offered no warmth. "Here we go," Leon whispered, as the car door was opened by a footman. "Welcome to the snake pit." The moment Emmie stepped out of the car, the cold wasn't just in the air. It was in the stairs. The Blackwood Founders' Ball was not a party. It was an audience. The guests ascending the grand marble steps were a sea of black ties and jewels that glittered with malice. They were the descendants of Astors, Vanderbilts, and Rockefellers, a modern-day aristocracy that guarded its gates with vicious precision. Emmie, in her simple blue velvet, felt her armor crack. The other women were poured into gowns that looked like spun glass and liquid metal. Diamonds dripped from their ears and throats. Their hair was sculpted. They were tall, rail-thin, and their eyes were sharp. And then there was Emmie, soft, curved, and visibly, unmistakably pregnant. The whispers began instantly, a sibilant, hissing sound just beneath the polite classical music echoing from the ballroom. "Is that her? Good heavens, he actually brought her. She's certainly blossoming. She trapped him. It's the oldest trick in the book. My maid's cousin did the same thing. And that dress, is that velvet? How quaint." Leon's hand was a vice on the small of her back. "Don't listen," he hissed, his face a mask of social pleasantry. "Smile, just smile and walk." Emmie lifted her chin. She remembered the word, regal. She focused on the spot between Leon's shoulder blades and walked. The ballroom was a cavern of gold and light. A 20-foot Christmas tree, draped in what looked like real crystals, stood in one corner. A string quartet played Vivaldi. Waiters moved like ghosts, offering flutes of champagne and canapes Emmie couldn't identify. And at the center of it all, like a spider in a glittering web, was Stella Blackwood. She was not a woman. She was a sculpture of ice, tall and impossibly thin, in a silver gown that looked forged, not sewn. She stood on a slightly raised dais, greeting her guests. She wore the famous Blackwood diamonds, a necklace and earrings so large, so flawless, they looked like weapons. Her silver blonde hair was swept into a chignon so tight it seemed to pull the skin of her face taut. As Leon and Emmie approached, a hush fell over their immediate vicinity. "Leon, darling," Stella said, her voice a low, cultured purr. She extended a cheek for him to kiss, her eyes never leaving Emmie. "You're late." "Mother?" Leon said, his voice strained. "You remember my wife, Emmie?" Stella's gaze travelled down. It started at Emmie's modestly styled hair, skimmed over her face, and then stopped, hard, on her belly. There was a long, terrible silence. "Ah, yes," Stella said finally, her lip curling in a microscopic sneer. "The incident." She turned her eyes back to Emmie. They were the colour of a winter sky, pale, cold, and utterly empty. She extended a hand, diamonds flashing. Emmie, flustered, went to shake it. Stella simply let her own hand hang there, limp, forcing Emmie to awkwardly grasp her fingers. "We are so pleased. You could come," Stella said. "It's not often we entertain." "Well, you." Emmie felt the blood drain from her face. "It's an honour to be here, Mrs. Blackwood." "Oh, Stella, please," the woman purred, retrieving her hand as if it had been soiled. "We are family, after all, or something to that effect. Now, Leon, darling, I must steal you. The Sinclairs are here, and Madeline is dying to hear about your Hong Kong merger. Mother, I'm with Emmie. Don't be silly. Your wife can mingle. Find herself a water. I'm sure she's thirsty." With a grip of steel, Stella grabbed Leon's arm and physically pulled him away, steering him toward a glamorous, laughing group in the corner. "Leon," Madeline was just saying. And just like that, Emmie was alone. She was an island. The sea of guests parted around her, creating a bubble of isolation. They would look, whisper, and turn away, their shoulders forming a solid wall of rejection. She could feel the stares on her back, on her dress, on her stomach. She saw a waiter with a tray of water and moved toward it, her mouth desperately dry. As she reached for a glass, a woman with emeralds at her throat and a face like a hawk stepped in front of her. "Oops, so sorry," the woman said, not sounding sorry at all. "I was just parched." She took the last glass of water. "You must be the new addition." It was Beatrice, Leon's sister. She was a younger, sharper, meaner version of her mother. "Beatrice, it's nice to meet you properly," Emmie tried. Beatrice laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Oh, bend properly is not a word I'd use for any of this, darling. Tell me, did you find that dress in a trunk in your attic? Or is it a rental?" I like it," Emmie said, her voice small. "Of course you do," Beatrice said, taking a sip of champagne. "It's very sweet. My mother is going to eat you alive. Good luck." Beatrice turned and disappeared into the crowd. Emmie was left standing, her hand on her belly, her heart pounding a sick rhythm against her ribs. She looked across the room, searching for Leon. She found him. He was in the group with the woman his mother had called Madeline Sinclair. Madeline was stunning, draped in red silk, and she was laughing, her hand resting possessively on Leon's forearm. As Emmie watched, Leon laughed too, a full, easy laugh she hadn't heard from him all night. He glanced up, and his eyes met Emmie's across the expanse of the ballroom. He saw her. He saw her distress, her isolation, and he did nothing. He just gave her a small, pained wince and turned back to Madeline. That was the first cut. The real one. Emmie realized with a cold, sinking horror that her simple blue dress wasn't the armor she'd hoped for. It was a target. The next hour was a blur of polite, crushing torture. Emmie tried to be invisible, but her very presence was a spectacle. She found a corner near a large, imposing ficus tree, hoping to blend in. But it was no use. The guests, emboldened by Stella's public dismissal, treated her like a curiosity. "Is it true you were a librarian?" One older man, his face a roadmap of burst blood vessels, asked her leeringly. "How?" "Novel. Did you check him out?" "You must be so thrilled," another woman, dripping in pearls, confided. "To go from that to this. It's a real-life fairy tale. You must show Leon my daughter, Clarissa. She's just graduated from Yale." Every word was a paper cut. Every smile was a dagger. Emmie just nodded, murmured, "Excuse me," and tried to find a friendly face. There were none. She felt a cramp in her lower back. The stress, the standing, the baby. She needed to sit down. She needed Leon. She scanned the room again. He was gone. He wasn't with the Madeleine group. He wasn't with his mother. He had simply vanished. A wave of panic, hot and acidic, rose in her throat. She was alone. She was 5 months pregnant, in a hostile room, and her husband had abandoned her. "I need to find Leon," she whispered to herself, pushing away from the wall. She moved through the crowd, which seemed to thicken and press in on her. "Excuse me. Pardon me." As she neared the center of the room, she passed a small, antique table. It was fragile, spindle-legged, and held a single enormous crystal vase filled with white orchids. It was Beatrice who did it. Emmie would be sure of it later. A perfectly shod foot shot out. Or perhaps it was a hip, a deliberate shove. Emmie, already off balance from the pregnancy and the stress, stumbled. She reached out, trying to catch herself. Her hand hit the table. The sound that followed was catastrophic. It wasn't a tinkle. It was a crash. The heavy crystal vase toppled, hit the marble floor, and exploded. Water, orchids, and 1,000 shards of glass sprayed across the floor. The music, a jaunty Mozart piece, screeched to a halt as if a record had been scratched. 100 conversations stopped mid-sentence. 200 eyes, a sea of calculating, cold, merciless eyes, snapped to her. Emmie was frozen. She was standing in a puddle, flowers at her feet, her hand still outstretched. Silence. A vast, echoing, terrible silence that stretched for an eternity. And then, a laugh. It was high-pitched, a cruel, piercing titter. It came from Madeline Sinclair, the woman in red, who had reappeared at the edge of the circle. "My God," she giggled, covering her mouth with a hand weighed down by a 10-carat diamond. "She's like a bull in a china shop." Another laugh joined in. Beatrice, her face a mask of false concern. "Oh dear. Clumsy, clumsy." Then it spread. It wasn't a roar of laughter. It was worse. It was a ripple of snickers, of aristocratic titters, of condescending chuckles. They were laughing at her, at the poor, pregnant girl in her common velvet dress, who didn't know how to behave, who didn't know how to exist in their world without breaking things. Emmie's face burned. Tears welled, hot and stinging. She looked for Leon, a desperate, silent plea. He was there. He had emerged from a side door, his father Arthur beside him. He saw her. He saw the mess. He saw the laughing faces. He saw the tears streaming down her face. Emmie held out a hand. "Leon." He took a step, but then a hand landed on his arm. Stella. She had glided through the crowd, her face a mask of thunderous rage. She didn't look at Emmie. She looked at the crowd. "Silence!" she snapped. The laughter died, replaced by a hungry, expectant quiet. Stella Blackwood finally turned her gaze on Emmie. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of utter, profound disgust, as if she were looking at an insect. "That vase," Stella said, her voice lethally soft, but carrying to every corner of the room, was a gift from the last Empress of China, a Ming dynasty original. It was priceless. Emmie's blood ran cold. I'm so sorry. It was an accident." "An accident," Stella repeated, as if the word were foreign. "My dear girl, you couldn't afford the water that was in that vase. Your entire bloodline, past and future, wouldn't be enough to cover the cost of a single shard of that glass." The crowd murmured. They were horrified. But not for Emmie. They were horrified by her. "You come into my home," Stella continued, stepping closer. "A home built by generations of greatness. You trap my son. You show up here in that, looking like a common. Like that." She waved a dismissive hand at Emmie's belly. "And you destroy priceless artifacts. You are a grifter. A common, clumsy grifter." Emmie was sobbing now, open, ugly sobs. "Leon," she whispered, looking at him. "Leon, please." Leon stood rooted to the spot, his face ashen. His mother's words were a wall between them. He looked from his mother's iron gaze to his wife's pleading, tear-stained face. "Mother, perhaps," he began, his voice weak. "Perhaps nothing," Stella cut him off. "She has humiliated this family. She has humiliated you." She turned back to Emmie. "Get out." "What?" "Get out of my house. I will have security escort you. As for the child, our lawyers will be in touch. We will be contesting paternity. This entire charade is over." "Contesting paternity?" Emmie's sob choked in her throat. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. She clutched her stomach, a primal, protective instinct. This was no longer about a dress or a vase. This was a war, and they had just threatened her child. She looked at Leon one last time, his eyes. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the floor, at the broken glass, anywhere but at her. He was silent. He was letting it happen. The betrayal was complete. It was absolute. And in that moment, something inside Emmie Vance Blackwood shattered, just like the vase. But what rose from the wreckage wasn't fear. It was ice. She stopped crying. The tears just stopped. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. She straightened her spine. She looked Stella Blackwood dead in the eye. "No," Emmie said. Her voice was quiet, but it was so charged with sudden, cold fury that it cut through the silence. Stella blinked, taken aback. "What did you say?" "I said no. You won't be contesting anything, and I'm not going anywhere. But you're going to wish you had." A collective gasp went through the room. Who was this girl? Emmie turned from Stella and looked at the crowd. She saw only enemies. Then she looked at Leon, her husband, the man who had done nothing. "You," she said to him, her voice shaking with a newfound strength, "are a coward." She then turned, ignoring the broken glass, ignoring Stella's sputtering, apoplectic face, and walked. Not toward the exit. She walked toward a dark, velvet-draped hallway at the far end of the room, a service corridor. "Where are you going?" Beatrice sneered. "To find the servants' entrance? It's where you belong." Emmie didn't look back. She pushed through the velvet drape and disappeared into the darkness. She was done with them. She was done with all of it. All she had to do now was make one phone call. The service corridor was cold and dark. It smelled of floor wax and old dust. Emmie leaned against the wall, the sudden silence a roaring in her ears. Her heart was a trapped bird, beating against the cage of her ribs. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her velvet dress pooling around her. The tears came again, but this time they were not for them. They were for her own stupidity. How could she have believed in him? How could she have believed that love would be enough to bridge the chasm between their worlds? Leon's love wasn't a bridge. It was a paper-thin veneer over a core of pure, abject fear. Fear of his mother, fear of his world, fear of losing his status. And she, Emmie, had been the sacrifice. She cried for the baby inside her, a child who would be born into this nest of vipers with a coward for a father. Contesting paternity. The words echoed. Stella hadn't just insulted her. She had declared war on an unborn child. Emmie's hand went to the small, hidden pocket sewn into the seam of her dress. Her fingers brushed against cold, hard plastic. Not her familiar smartphone. This was something else. Her history, the one she'd given Leon, was only a partial truth. She had been raised by her aunt, a kind woman named Rose. They had lived modestly. She had been a librarian, but she wasn't an orphan. She was hidden. Her mother, Isabella, had been the real story. Isabella was the black sheep, the runaway, the daughter who had committed the ultimate sin. She had fallen in love with a poor musician and run away from her own family. A family that made the Blackwoods look like street merchants. Emmie's mother was Emmie Dupont, and her grandmother, the woman who had cast her daughter out and then spent a lifetime trying to find her again, was Anastasia Dupont, the Anastasia Dupont, a woman who didn't just have old money, she was the old money. A recluse who hadn't been seen in public in 3 decades, she controlled a global empire so vast and so private that it made Blackwood Industries look like a corner store. The Duponts didn't just own companies, they owned the banks that owned the companies. Emmie's mother had died when Emmie was 10, of a sickness that cheap insurance couldn't cover. Her Aunt Rose had raised her on a shoestring. It was only 2 years ago, when Aunt Rose was dying, that she had given Emmie a locked box. Inside was a letter, a new passport, and a single unlisted phone number. "If you are ever in trouble," Rose had whispered, "if you are ever truly at the end of your rope, you call this number. But know this, Emmie. Once you call it, you can never go back." Emmie had called it. She had been flown to a private island. She had met her grandmother. Anastasia Dupont was not a warm, cuddly old woman. She was a general, a frail, bird-like woman with eyes that could burn through steel. "You have your mother's eyes," Anastasia had rasped, "and your father's foolish heart. I cannot get her back, but I can protect you. I will make you." For 2 years, Emmie had been in training, not as a librarian, but as an heir. She learned finance, law, logistics, and most importantly, how to spot a lie. Her job at the library was a cover, her chance meeting with Leon Blackwood. That was the one part that was real, a genuine accident, a real, foolish, human connection that had thrown Anastasia's grand plans into chaos. "The Blackwoods," Anastasia had hissed, "are thieves. Stella's father built his company on a patent he stole from my father. They are rotten to the core. Stella is a financial criminal. I have been building a case for 30 years, and you, my dear, waltzed in and got yourself pregnant by the enemy's son." Emmie had been ashamed, but she loved Leon, or she thought she did. "Very well," Anastasia had said. "We will play this hand. Go to your fiancé. Marry him. But you will be my eyes. This ball, this is the test. See the man you have chosen. See what he is made of when his mother comes for you. See if he is a man or a mouse. Anastasia had given her the simple burner phone. You will not call me. When the time comes, and it will come, you will send one word. Execute. That is all. We will handle the rest. Emmie pulled the phone from her pocket. The screen lit up. 1% battery. It was enough. She looked at the phone. This was it. The end of Emmie Vance. The end of her naive dreams of a simple life. If she sent this text, she was no longer just Leon's wife. She was Anastasia Dupont's granddaughter. She was the weapon. She thought of the laughter. She thought of the broken glass. She thought of Stella's words, contesting paternity. She thought of Leon's silence. Her thumb, steady as a surgeon's, typed the single word, execute. She pressed send. The phone's screen went black, the battery finally dying. Emmie took a deep breath. She felt the baby kick, a small, reassuring flutter. It's okay, she whispered, pushing herself up from the cold floor. Mummy's here, and Grandma's coming. She smoothed the velvet of her dress. She wiped the last of the tear stains from her face. The fear was gone, replaced by a glacial calm she recognized from her grandmother. It was time to return to the party. When Emmie pushed back through the velvet curtain, the atmosphere in the ballroom had changed. The festive air was gone, replaced by a tense, bloodthirsty excitement. The pack had tasted blood, and they wanted more. Stella was holding court, a glass of champagne in her hand, her voice ringing with false sympathy. It's a tragedy, really, she was saying to a rapt audience. The boy is just too soft-hearted. He sees a wounded bird and wants to save it. He didn't realize this one was a cuckoo, trying to push the real children out of the nest. Beatrice and Madeline were flanking her, nodding like vicious little dolls. And pregnant, too, Madeline sighed, loud enough for all to hear. It's so calculated. I mean, who even is she? Leon swears she's legitimate, but a paternity test will clear that right up. We will be getting a court order. Of course, Stella said, taking a delicate sip. We must protect the Blackwood line. We have a prenuptial agreement, naturally. She won't see a dime. She'll be back in whatever library. We found her in by morning. Leon was not there. He was standing by a window, his back to the room, looking out at the dark, snow-covered lawns. A portrait of a coward. Emmie walked into the center of the room. She didn't hurry. Her footsteps made no sound on the thick Persian rug. She just appeared. A guest saw her first and nudged his neighbor. The whispering started, a new ripple of, "She's back!" Stella stopped mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing. "I told you to get out." "You did," Emmie said. Her voice was different. The small, mousy tremor was gone. It was clear, cold, and amplified by the sudden, absolute stillness of the room. "You'll be contesting paternity," Emmie stated. It wasn't a question. Stella scoffed. "Our lawyers will be in touch with, well, with whomever people like you use. And the prenup," Emmie continued, ticking points off on her fingers. "The one Leon had me sign." "Ironclad," Beatrice chirped. "I had my own lawyer look it over." "I'm sure you did," Emmie said. "A document designed to protect the Blackwood assets from a gold digger." "Precisely," Stella said, smiling. "You're smarter than you look." "Oh, I am," Emmie said. "But here's the thing, Stella. You can't protect your assets from me when all your assets are already mine." Stella's smile faltered. "What is this? This nonsense? Have you been drinking? Get her out of here. Leon, control your thing." Leon finally turned from the window. "Emmie, please," he begged. "Just let's go. We can talk about this at home." "Home?" Emmie laughed. It was a single, bitter sound. You mean your mother's apartment? Or the penthouse she pays for? You don't have a home, Leon. You have a gilded cage, and you've been silent for the last time. As she spoke, a low, mechanical whir began to sound from outside. It was faint at first, then grew. It wasn't a car, it was too big. Boom! 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 The sound of helicopter blades thrumming through the night. The guests murmured, moving to the windows. Who on earth is landing a helicopter? Probably the governor, someone said. But the sound was wrong. It wasn't one helicopter, it was 3. They were landing on the great lawn, their searchlights cutting through the dark, illuminating the ballroom in strobes of white light. What is the meaning of this? Stella demanded, marching toward the window. At the same time, the grand, oaken double doors of the ballroom burst open. They didn't swing. They were thrown open, slamming against the walls with a crack that sounded like thunder. 2 men in black, tactical gear. Not party security, but ex-military, ex-Mossad by the look of them, stepped into the room. They were followed by 4 more, who fanned out, creating a perimeter. They were silent, their faces impassive. The string quartet stopped. Glasses were frozen halfway to lips. The room fell into a silence so profound, so absolute, that Emmie could hear the intake of her own breath. It was a silence born not of politeness, but of pure, unadulterated shock. Who dares? Arthur Blackwood, the family patriarch, finally spoke, his voice a reedy quaver. This is a private party. The men ignored him. They stood at attention. And into the silent, guarded space, she walked. Or rather, she glided. She was an old woman, perhaps 90 years old, impossibly frail. She used a simple, silver-topped cane. She was dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored black wool suit that looked like it was from the 1940s. Her white hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her eyes, behind a pair of old-fashioned spectacles, were the only things alive in her face. They were the eyes of a hawk. They were the eyes of a general. They were Emmie's eyes. The true aristocrats in the room, the ones whose names were on museums, not just buildings, knew exactly who she was. A man, a Rockefeller descendant, literally choked on his drink. "My God," he whispered. It can't be. It's Anastasia Dupont." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Stella Blackwood turned the color of ash. Her glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble. But this time, no one noticed. "Anastasia," Stella whispered, her voice a strangled sound. I thought you were dead." Anastasia Dupont paused, her cane tapping once on the floor. The sound was like a gavel. "Dead?" Her voice rasped, dry as old parchment. "A common misconception, Stella, one I cultivate. It keeps the insects away." She surveyed the room, her gaze sweeping over the gawking, frozen faces. Her eyes landed on Stella, Beatrice, and Madeline. "It appears," Anastasia said, "we have an infestation." Anastasia Dupont ignored everyone. Her gaze swept past the horrified Blackwoods as if they were furniture. She glided across the floor, her security detail parting the sea of stunned guests. She stopped directly in front of Emmie. The room was so quiet, the thrum of the helicopters outside was the only sound. Anastasia looked Emmie up and down. She noted the simple velvet dress, the tear tracks, the protective hand on her stomach. A flicker of something, not softness, but approval, passed through her ancient eyes. "My dear child," Anastasia's voice was suddenly warm, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You are pale. Are these people not feeding you?" Emmie let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 6 months. A small, watery smile touched her lips. "They were distracted, grandmother." Grandmother. The word exploded in the silence. Stella physically staggered, clutching at her husband's arm. Mother? Leon's face was a mask of utter, catastrophic disbelief. Emmie! What? Who? This, Emmie said, her voice ringing with newfound, borrowed power, is my grandmother, Anastasia Dupont. Anastasia raised an eyebrow. Is that the weak one you married? She asked Emmie, not bothering to lower her voice. Yes, grandmother, Emmie said. Humph, he has your father's weak chin. Anastasia turned, and for the first time, fixed her gaze on Stella Blackwood. It was not a gaze of anger. It was a gaze of ownership. Stella, Anastasia said, her voice dropping back to its icy monotone. You were a new money social climber when my father snubbed yours at the 29 cotillion. I see nothing has changed. You're still wearing jewelry that's far too large for your breeding. Stella's face crumpled. This was a humiliation so total, so complete, that it went beyond mere words. This was an execution of her very social existence. How dare you? Stella sputtered. This is my house. Is it? Anastasia replied, with a faint, curious tilt of her head. That's very debatable. You see, when your father, that criminal, stole the patent for the synthetic catalyst from my father, he built his entire empire on a lie that my family has been auditing for the last 30 years. She nodded to a man who had entered behind her, a man in a simple, perfectly cut suit, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. Mr. Sterling, if you please. Mr. Sterling was not a man. He was an instrument. He stepped forward. Stella Blackwood, Arthur Blackwood, Beatrice Blackwood. He addressed each of them. You are hereby served. He didn't serve them a lawsuit. He served them documents. He handed a thick sheaf to Arthur, another to Beatrice, and the last to Stella. What is this? Stella spat, ripping the envelope open. That, Anastasia said, is a transfer of assets. You see, Stella, for the past decade, my organization has been buying your debt. Every bad merger, every failed venture, every bridge loan you took out to maintain this lifestyle was financed by me. Mr. Sterling continued. As of 9 p.m. this evening, the Dupont Trust has called in all outstanding loans held by Blackwood Industries. In accordance with the universal default clause in your credit agreements, your failure to service this debt means all assets held as collateral are now forfeit. What collateral? Arthur Blackwood whispered, his hands shaking as he read the document. Everything, Anastasia said. Blackwood Industries, the Fifth Avenue apartment, the homes in the Hamptons and Palm Beach, and this house. Hawthorne. She tapped her cane on the marble floor. This house, in fact, has been in my granddaughter's name for 2 months. The room reeled. But the prenup, Beatrice shrieked. She signed a prenup. She gets nothing. Emmie finally spoke. You are a fool, Beatrice, she said, stepping forward to stand beside her grandmother. I did sign it. I had my own lawyer review it, a man named Sterling. Mr. Sterling gave a thin smile. The agreement was indeed ironclad. It stipulated that in the event of a divorce, Mrs. Blackwood, Emmie, would receive no assets from Mr. Leon Blackwood. It said nothing, however, about Mr. Leon Blackwood receiving no assets from her. Emmie continued. It was a standard gold-digger prenup. But you were so arrogant, you assumed I was the one with nothing. You never bothered to check. Anastasia Dupont raised her hand. But this is all business. The real issue is one of art. Stella, you accused my granddaughter of breaking a Ming vase. It was, Stella insisted weakly. Was it? Anastasia looked to her side. A small, mousy man in a tweed jacket had slipped in with her party, unnoticed. "Professor," she said. The man, the world's foremost expert on Chinese ceramics from the Met, stepped forward and knelt by the puddle of broken glass. He picked up a shard. He inspected it for no more than 3 seconds. "Oh dear me, no," he said, his voice fussy. "This is a 1980s replica, a very poor one, made in Taiwan. I'd value it at, perhaps $200 retail." The last remaining pillar of Stella's dignity crumbled. The laughter this time was real. It started as a low rumble from the guests who, sensing the seismic shift in power, were now firmly on the Dupont side. But, Stella was hyperventilating. "And now," Mr. Sterling said, his voice cutting through the rising noise, "we come to the criminal portion of the evening." He nodded to the security detail. "Federal agents, if you please." The men in tactical gear were not private security. They were FBI. They moved forward. "Stella Blackwood," one agent said, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and racketeering. You can't." "Your husband," Mr. Sterling said, "has been a most cooperative witness." Arthur Blackwood, pale and shaking, looked at his wife. "I'm sorry, my dear," he mumbled. "But I couldn't. She's a Dupont." "He signed a full confession," Anastasia explained calmly, "in exchange for immunity and a transfer of his voting shares to my granddaughter. He was terrified of you, Stella, and, as it turns out, with good reason." As the agents cuffed a screaming Stella, Emmie finally turned to the last person. Leon. The ballroom was no longer a place of celebration. It was a triage center at the end of a war, and the Blackwood family were the primary casualties. Stella Blackwood, a woman who had never had a hair out of place in her life, was now a portrait of magnificent ruin. As the FBI agents, no longer pretending to be anything else, snapped the cold steel of handcuffs onto her impossibly thin wrists, her composure finally, utterly, and catastrophically broke. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound that tore through the remaining whispers. "I am Stella Blackwood. You'll be fired. You'll be ruined. Get your hands off me. Arthur, you useless old fool. Do something." But Arthur Blackwood was in his own quiet hell. He was being led away by a different agent, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. He looked, for the first time, like the old man he was. He looked at his screaming wife, then at his son, who stood frozen by the window, and finally at Anastasia Dupont. He gave a small, defeated nod. It was the nod of a man who had been playing a losing hand for 30 years and was simply relieved the game was over. Beatrice, unlike her mother, was not a fighter. She was a weeper. She had collapsed onto a damask settee, her couture gown hiked up around her knees, sobbing into her hands. "It's all gone," she wailed. "It's all gone. The house, the trust, it's all gone." The guests, the ones who hadn't already fled to their cars, were a cowering mass near the doorway, desperate to leave, but terrified to move without permission from the new, true power in the room. Madeline Sinclair, the woman in red, even made a half-hearted attempt to approach Emmie, her face a mask of false, desperate friendship. "Emmie, darling, I had no idea. What your grandmother did, it was brilliant." Emmie simply looked at her, one cold, level stare, and the woman flinched and scurried away, disappearing into the crowd. The room emptied. The agents took the Blackwoods. The guests evaporated. Mr. Sterling, with a team of his own, was quietly giving instructions to the household staff, who, sensing a change in ownership, were now listening with placid obedience. Soon there was no one left in the vast ballroom but the three of them. Emmie, Leon, and Anastasia watching from the doorway like a hawk on a perch. The silence that remained was heavy with the smell of spilled champagne, crushed flowers, and utter desolation. The broken shards of the fake Ming vase glittered like fallen stars on the marble floor. Emmie began to walk. Her footsteps, silent on the rugs, now echoed on the marble as she crossed the vast, empty expanse towards the man by the window. Each step was a hammer blow, sealing the coffin on the life she had thought she wanted. He was still her husband. He was still the father of her child. He was still the man she had fallen in love with in a dusty library on a rainy afternoon. And he was a complete, total stranger. Leon finally turned. His face was a wreck. The perfect, handsome mask was gone, replaced by a pasty, sweat-slicked terror. His eyes were wide, uncomprehending. "Emmie," he whispered. It was a plea. "Emmie, I had no idea. I swear, all of this. I didn't know." Emmie stopped, 5 feet away from him. She kept the distance. It was a chasm. "No, Leon, you didn't," she said, and her voice was a strange, calm thing. "But that's not the part that matters. You didn't know I had a grandmother who could buy your entire world. You didn't know I had power. That's not the test you failed." "What test?" he stammered, his hands twisting together. "I'll fix this. We can fix this. I don't care about the money. I don't. I'll tell them. I'll tell her." He gestured wildly at Anastasia. "I'll tell her I don't want any of it. It's just you. I love you, Emmie. I love you, and I love our baby." "Do you?" she asked, and the question was so quiet, so genuine, that it cut him deeper than any shout. "Do you, Leon? Because I stood here not 20 minutes ago, and I was just Emmie. I was the librarian. I was the common grifter. I was the girl in the cheap dress. And I was the mother of your child." She took a step closer, and he flinched. "When they laughed," she said, her voice dropping, "you were silent. When Madeline and Beatrice called me trash, you were silent. And when your mother, that monster, stood in front of 100 people and threatened to take my child, to contest my paternity," Emmie's voice broke, just for a second, on a wave of pure, cold fury. "You stood by the door, and you were silent. I was scared," he shouted, his voice cracking, tears of self-pity streaming down his face. "You don't know what she's like. My whole life, she's controlled everything. I was trapped, Emmie. I was trying to figure out a way." "No!" Emmie's voice was a whip crack. "You weren't trapped. You were comfortable. You were a coward. It was easier for you to let them tear me apart than to stand up to your mother. It was easier to let me be the sacrifice than to risk your inheritance." She looked at him, her gaze sweeping over his perfect, ruined face. "When I was on the floor, in that puddle, and I looked at you, I wasn't looking for a billionaire to save me. I was looking for my husband, and he wasn't there." The words hit him. He finally, truly, understood. The denial crumbled. He fell, not in a graceful faint, but in an ugly, pathetic heap. He fell to his knees on the marble floor and crawled, clutching at the hem of her simple blue velvet dress. "Emmie, please," he sobbed, burying his face in the fabric. "Please don't leave me. I'm nothing without you. I'll change. I swear. I'll be anything you want. I'll be the man you deserve. Just don't take the baby." Her heart, the part that was still human, still the girl from the library, ached. It ached for him, for the lost, weak man-child he was. She placed a hand on his head, his hair soft and damp under her palm. It was a gesture of absolution, and of farewell. "You can't be the man I deserve, Leon," she said softly, because you don't even know who you are. You're just a collection of your mother's opinions and your father's fears. You need to go find out who Leon Blackwood is when there's no money, no title, and no one to tell him what to do. He looked up, his face a mask of confusion. What do you mean? I mean, Emmie said, pulling her dress gently from his grasp, that Blackwood Industries is a hollow shell. It's built on fraud and propped up by my grandmother's loans. Its only value was as a trap, and your mother just stepped in it. She looked over her shoulder. Grandmother. Anastasia glided forward, her cane tapping. Yes, Emmie. As the new majority shareholder, Emmie said, her voice turning formal, my first act will be to file for bankruptcy and dissolve the company. We're liquidating. The fraud is too deep to save. Leon's face went from pale to bloodless. Everything? But that's what will I do? Where will I go? I don't know, Emmie said, with a dreadful, final honesty. You're smart, Leon. You're educated. You'll get a job. You'll get an apartment. For the first time in your life, you'll have the chance to be your own man, to build something that's actually yours. This child, she continued, placing both hands on her stomach in a gesture that was now pure power, will be a Dupont. He or she will have my name. They will have my protection. They will never feel what I felt tonight. They will never be at the mercy of people like your family. Emmie, no, you can't. Mr. Sterling will be in touch, she said, her voice hardening, all softness gone. He will arrange the terms of the divorce. You can petition for visitation after the baby is born, and after you've proven you're a stable, independent adult. When you have a job, when you have your own apartment, when you've gone to therapy, when my lawyers are satisfied that you are not a danger to our child's well-being, then we can talk. She turned her back on him. She left him kneeling on the floor, a king in his ruined castle. She walked, not to the main doors, but to where Anastasia stood. Her grandmother looked at her, a flicker of pride in her ancient reptilian eyes. That, Anastasia rasped, was adequate. A bit theatrical, the kneeling, but you handled it. You have my eyes, but your mother's spine. A good combination. She held out a frail, powerful arm. Emmie took it. Mr. Sterling, Anastasia called over her shoulder. The lawyer, who had been waiting, materialized. Have the staff clear out the rest of this rabble, and have the locks on this house changed immediately. My granddaughter is tired, and she needs to inspect her new home. Emmie, in her simple velvet dress, her hair slightly mussed, her face stained with the memory of tears, walked with her grandmother out of the ballroom. She was no longer Emmie Vance, the librarian. She was not Emmie Blackwood, the humiliated wife. She was Emmie Dupont. And she was, finally, home. As they stepped out into the bitingly cold night air, the thwomp, thwomp, thwomp of the helicopter blades washed over them. The noise was a promise. A new, powerful, and ruthless life was beginning. The helicopter is warm, Anastasia said, gripping her arm. We have a board meeting at 8 a.m. You're chairing. Emmie took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. She looked back at the fortress of a house, its lights blazing on the ruins of a dynasty. It was hers. Of course, grandmother, she said. I'm ready. And just like that, the laughing stopped. In one night, Emmie went from the girl everyone laughed at to the woman who owned the entire room. She didn't just get revenge, she got everything. She took their company, their house, and most importantly, she took back her own power and a future for her child. Leon was left with nothing but the consequences of his own silence. This story is a powerful reminder that the people who laugh the loudest are often the ones with the most to lose. And true strength isn't about the dress you wear or the money in your account. It's about the steel in your spine when the world tries to break you. What did you think of Emmie's ultimate move? Was she right to leave Leon, or should she have given him a second chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of drama and epic justice, please hit that like button so I know to make more. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a good comeback story. And most importantly, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a single dramatic part of our next story. Thank you for listening.